The specific battlefield we're looking at today is Round 2, Group 37. And you have to remember, the stakes here are high. These 4 albums are already champions,
They've all fought their way through round 1.
beating out hundreds of other albums just to get to this stage. The elimination of any one of them is just brutal.
And what we had here was a collision. 4 really distinct musical eras and genres all clashing. It just guaranteed a conflict of criteria.
Okay, so our first contender, representing modern, hyper-polished electropop. It's Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa.
Then you have the underdog, the really unexpected contender, a TV soundtrack. It's Once More, with feeling from the cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Holding the flag for, 1980s synth-pop brilliance, it's Humans Lib, the debut from Howard Jones.
And finally, The Monolith, a compilation that represents really the pinnacle of cinematic music history. Best of Bond, James Bond.
That is, without a doubt, one of the most wildly diverse groups we've seen in the Quest.
It is.
It's a pure test of how you measure quality across completely different art forms. And the author's summary for this group is just brutal. He says, nostalgia can't save Humans Lib while James Bond slays Buffy the singing vampire slayer.
And that one phrase just gives you everything.
It gives you the whole story.
It gives you the final ranking, the dominant forces at play, the power of classic anthems, the pull of modern pop, and, the tragic failure of nostalgia, even when it's tied to this deep personal attachment.
So our job is to figure out how and why those slayers were just so effective.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. So let's begin with what seems like the biggest emotional cut for the author, the album that lands dead last. So, Once More with Feeling. It's in 4th place, it's eliminated, and yet the author spends probably the most time describing his sheer love for the source material, for Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Right, this isn't a critique of the show at all. It feels more like a really painful breakup with the album itself.
It really does. The personal history is so key here. He talks about being hooked on Buffy instantly back in the late 90s.
Yeah, he was drawn in by that mix of fantasy, sci-fi, horror, but he makes it very clear that the supernatural stuff was almost secondary to the intelligence of the writing.
Yes. He mentions the incredibly cool and witty dialogue exchanges between its interesting and likable characters. That sharp, rapid-fire wit was the real hook.
Oh, absolutely. That whole era of TV where a show like Buffy could mix high-stakes horror with genuinely clever, quotable banter like his example, you want to vague that up, it was kind of revolutionary.
It was, and that clever writing, that rapport between the characters, that's the foundation that allowed the show to take these huge risks.
I think what's fascinating is how he identifies the show's habit of duping its audiences. This wasn't just a quirky show, it was a show that was actively training you to expect the impossible.
Exactly. And he uses those brilliant narrative stunts as proof. You think about the Jonathan episode in season 3, where they changed the opening credits to make this nerdy side character look like the hero of the whole show.
Or the arrival of Buffy's sister, Dawn, in season 5. Just boom, she's there as if she had always been there, and you're left completely disoriented.
And even going right back to the very first episode, it completely subverts your expectations. It pulls the rug out from under you with that disguised vampire twist in the opening scene.
Right, so by the time season 6 came around, the audience wasn't just okay with the bizarre. They were primed for it. They were ready for the narrative equivalent of a hand grenade.
Which is exactly what the musical episode was. He remembers watching it for the first time. It's just the sheer shock of it.
Nobody saw it coming. A full-blown integrated musical. It was a massive roll of the dice.
A huge risk. And the proof that it worked is right there in his reaction. He watched it once, the credits rolled.
And he immediately watched it again, just to process what he'd even seen, the audacity of it.
So now we get to the album's unique challenge. If you listen to this album without being deeply, deeply invested in the show, the whole thing is almost impenetrable.
He really hammers this point home. He says it would have been incredibly difficult to pull off without all that context, but because we'd followed these characters for 6 seasons.
Buffy, Giles, Willow, Xander.
Right. We understood their fears, their damaged relationships, their histories, and all that shared history makes the lyrics function as this kind of emotional shorthand.
And the lyrics themselves, he says, they're more self-referential than anything else ever committed to CD.
They are just loaded with deep cuts for the fans. You think about the examples he gives. Xander singing, "It Must Be Witches."
I like Xander.
Or Anya's entire song about her fixation with rabbits. It's hilarious, but it's also tied to her deep-seated trauma.
And what's so clever is how the songs move the plot forward while revealing character. Like Giles in his song I've Got a Theory, he basically gives away who the villain is in the first line if you're paying attention.
The embedding of the narrative is just masterful.
Even Buffy's opening song, where she's singing about her life being dull and predictable, it just throws you into confusion. He admits he thought it was a dream sequence at first.
It's an immediate emotional gut punch. It uses the musical form to talk about profound depression in a way that just dialogue couldn't.
And this is what he calls Joss Whedon stumbling across some kind of musical formula for addiction.
He says the melodies just osmose into your brainwaves. He found himself humming Give Me Something to Sing About all the time.
He praises the standout tracks too. Walk Through the Fire, Under Your Spell, Standing, Rest in Peace. He admits the CD is incredibly listenable, that he can spin it 2 or 3 times in a row.
So we have this beloved, addictive, narrative masterpiece. Why on earth is it eliminated?
This is it. This is the critical moment where personal love just crashes head-on into the objective criteria of the album quest.
And he gives you a 2-pronged critique. First, he frames it. He says, in the context of what it is, a TV show putting on a musical with no professional singers or songwriters, it's a fantastic achievement.
Which is high praise.
It is. But then comes the cold, hard logic. The quest demands more. He just has to concede the truth. The singing is a bit average, and musically it's just okay.
And that's the dagger.
It really is, because an album quest demands quality that can stand on its own, outside of the context. You strip away the characters, and the singing, however charming, it just doesn't compare to professional vocalists.
The second flaw he points out is also critical. It's about the difference between a standalone album and a soundtrack.
The end of the CD.
Exactly. The final instrumentals, especially the suite from the episode Hush. He calls it a minor chore to listen to on its own.
And this is just a technical reality. Music written for a TV score is designed to support a narrative, not to be a captivating listen by itself.
Right.
The Hush suite is perfect in the show. It's minimalist. It's all about tension. But put that on in your car, and it just sounds like filler.
So the verdict is sealed. Even though he's still under its spell, the album just couldn't compete with the raw musical professionalism of the other 3.
It's a harsh lesson. Context is powerful, but in a quest for the best album, objective technical quality has to win out in the end.
And that brings us to the real nail-biter, the battle for the second qualifying spot. He also calls it a hell of a tussle.
Yeah, and it's between 2 electro-pop albums separated by, nearly 4 decades of music production?
It's a generational fight. You have Howard Jones's debut from 1984, Humans Lib, against Dua Lipa's 2020 smash, Future Nostalgia.
So it's the album that defined the sound of an era versus a modern album that consciously perfects that same retro sound.
Let's start with Howard Jones and the huge nostalgia factor here. The author calls Humans Lib one of the earliest albums he regularly listened to, from about the age of 10-ish. It's embedded in his foundational musical DNA.
And you get that amazing mental image of him listening to it while playing on his ZX Spectrum.
Right.
That connection, music tied to the dawn of personal computing and early adolescence, it gives the album so much sentimental weight.
But as we just saw with Buffy, sentiment often isn't enough in this quest.
No, it's not. And he does take time to defend the album's musical structure. He thinks it gets unfairly dismissed as just superficial synth pop.
He argues it's well-engineered and fairly slickly produced for its time.
But he also notes that it has a homegrown feel compared to the competition. The key point he makes, though, is about the instrumentation. He says the electronics are balanced with plenty of real piano, brass, and drums.
Which gives it a much more well-rounded sound. That's a critical distinction. It's not just pure minimal synth work, which can date really badly. Jones used acoustic elements to give it weight.
And that depth is in the lyrics, too. Material-wise, it had 4 massive hit singles: What Is Love, New Song, Hide and Seek, and Pearl in the Shell.
Can't argue with those.
But he elevates it because of the themes. He calls it a tidy little album full of philosophical musings, mysticism, critical thinking, and questions of identity.
It wasn't just disposable pop. It was using new technology to explore some pretty deep ideas.
Okay, now let's turn to the challenger, Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia.
Which he describes very simply and powerfully as a more than solid electro-pop dance effort, which contains several bangers.
And here is where the production difference just becomes insurmountable. Future Nostalgia is built with what he calls Premier League production techniques.
Every single sound, the bass lines, the synths, is hyper clean, perfectly compressed, designed for maximum impact on modern speakers.
Think about the bass on Don't Start Now, or just the sheer energy of Physical. This is where 2020 technology gives an advantage that 1984 tech just couldn't touch. The mix is flawless.
And in terms of hit density, you could argue Dua Lipa has even more massive, globally recognized singles. He mentions Physical, Levitating, and Hallucinate.
But even this ultra-slick modern album wasn't perfect in his eyes. He's a tough critic.
He is.
He notes that it's bookended by a couple of less favorable efforts. And he specifically calls out one track, Good in Bed, which he says does its best to ruin the album.
I find that fascinating. That one track he actively dislikes,
Right.
It still wasn't enough to sink the whole album.
No, the sheer quality surrounding that weak link was just too strong. And so when it came down to the final decision...
Second place goes to Future Nostalgia, defeating Humans Live by a small but critical margin.
And that sends the Cherish Howard Jones album packing. The author's emotional conflict here is just palpable.
He says he was happy and sad at the same time.
Happy because on objective musical grounds, production, hooks, sonic perfection, it was the right decision.
But sad because that ZX Spectrum memory, that powerful sentimental value, was just overcome by critical logic.
And this is where he delivers the killer line, the ultimate insight. He argues that because of its conscious retro sound and its perfect execution,
Future Nostalgia might actually be more 1980s than Humans Live.
Let's really dig into that claim, because it's the defining idea of this whole section. How can a 2020 album be more 80s than an actual 80s album?
Well, it's about the idea of an idealized aesthetic. In 1984, Howard Jones was limited by the technology he had. The sound was genuine, but it was also constrained.
Right, whereas in 2020, Dua Lipa and her Premier League producers had access to everything. 40 years of synth sounds, drum machines, mixing techniques.
They could pick and choose the absolute best parts of 80s dance pop, the massive reverbs, the deep analog bass, and polish them to sonic perfection without any of the old technological limitations.
So future nostalgia isn't the 80s as it was, it's the 80s as we imagine it to be. It's the platonic ideal of the 80s sound. It's nostalgia perfected, weaponized even.
And that technological superiority, that sonic polish, that was enough to override decades of emotional attachment.
Sentiment and deep lyrics weren't enough to beat Premier League bangers and perfected retro production. Future nostalgia goes through.
So now we get to the undisputed winner, the champion of Group 37, taking that first qualifying spot.
The Best of Bond, James Bond compilation.
Which is a result that really should have been, well, unlikely based on the author's own previous statements.
Exactly. In a prior review, he explicitly said compilations are going to have their work cut out in round 2.
And yet here we are. He says this magnificent James Bond compilation take top spot, making me look like a chump.
You have to love that honesty. He really thought this collection, which covers Bond anthems from 1962 to 2008, might get taken down by 2 high-quality pop albums.
So what allowed it to shatter his own rule?
His conclusion is pretty simple. It just had too much top-end class in both performers and songs.
This isn't just a collection of singles. It's a historical document.
It's the sheer weight and the untouchable quality of the core tracks. We're talking about songs that just cannot be matched by anything else in the group, not even Dua Lipa's Premier League production.
Think about the performers. Shirley Bassey's masterpieces, Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever.
Paul McCartney and Wings with Live and Let Die. Carly Simon's Nobody Does It Better.
And he specifically contrasts Shirley Bassey's vocal power on Goldfinger with, as he put it, Sarah Michelle Gellar's Average singing on the Buffy album.
It's the perfect comparison. That is the definition of a deep dive. Bassey represents the absolute peak of professional, theatrical, explosive singing.
And that kind of quality instantly elevates the whole collection. It's a roster of iconic performers delivering, in many cases, the best songs of their careers.
Plus, the sheer size of it. It runs for 77 minutes. He rightly calls it effectively a double album. It's just an overwhelming amount of high-quality, historically significant music.
But he's not just a fanboy here. He is a critic, and he admits that the strength of this group did manage to even begin to expose some of the weaker Bond anthems.
And that's a crucial admission. The consistent quality of Howard Jones and Dua Lipa actually served a purpose. They helped shine a light on the less successful Bond songs.
Right. So he calls out 3 tracks that felt a bit more fragile when put up against that competition.
First, Sheryl Crow's Tomorrow Never Dies, which is, it's competent, but it sounds very late 90s mid-tempo, a bit dated.
And second, that kind of awkward pairing of Jack White and Alicia Keys on Another Way to Die.
Oh, from Quantum of Solace. That's a perfect example of a stylistic mismatch. It's musically chaotic. It doesn't have that smooth, dramatic feel of the classics.
And third, maybe a little controversially, he includes Matt Monroe's From Russia with Love in that fragile category.
Yeah, I can see that. It's a classic. It's historically important, but that traditional crooner style. It can feel a little less bombastic when you play it right after Live and Let Die.
So if there was a path to victory for the other albums, it would have been by capitalizing on those weaker links.
Exactly. But here's the ultimate takeaway. Despite those dips in quality, the compilation's center of gravity was just too strong. It had way too many superb anthems and performances to trip up here.
It just sailed through to first place.
It did, but he leaves us with this interesting little warning. He predicts that round 3 might be a bigger hurdle for the Bond collection.
Because now its weaknesses have been exposed.
Right. They might be more vulnerable against even tougher, more consistent competition next time. It's that classic trade-off. The peaks are unsurpassed, but the valleys are there.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. A quick run through the final standings for this incredibly competitive group.
In 4th place, and eliminated, despite all the personal love and narrative genius, once more, with feeling.
In 3rd place, eliminated, defeated by superior production, but carrying huge sentimental weight. Humans Lib by Howard Jones.
Securing 2nd place and moving on, proving the power of that hyper-slick, retro-perfected modern sound. Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa.
And taking the top spot, advancing to round 3 after overcoming the author's own bias against compilations. Best of Bond, James Bond.
So the 2 albums that go through Bond and Dua Lipa, they teach us a really clear and kind of painful lesson about the criteria at this stage of the quest.
Yeah, what's the lesson here?
The primary rule seems to be that sheer high-end professional quality, whether it's historical like Bassey or ultra-modern like Dua Lipa, it just trumps everything else. It trumps deep nostalgia, and it trumps context-dependent brilliance.
And if you look at the 2 albums that got cut, both were so heavily weighted by sentiment.
Right. He loved the Buffy album, but the average singing and the standalone musical flaws, they sank it.
And he had that profound ZX Spectrum connection to Humans Lib, but it just got outgunned by the production of its modern challenger.
The recurring theme here is the impact of nostalgia. It provides that intense emotional connection.
The memory of the ZX Spectrum, the witty dialogue of Buffy.
But time and again, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to overturn a strict, critical assessment of objective musical quality.
What's so interesting to me is that his own internal conflict forced him to prioritize the album's structure and sonic excellence over his own memories. He loved Humans Lib, but he had to admit that Dua Lipa had made a sonically superior record.
It forces you, the listener, to ask a really uncomfortable question. Are you ranking the music itself, the structure, the performance, or are you ranking the memory that's attached to the music? And in this quest, he is trying so hard to do the former.
Even when his heart is pulling him in the other direction.
And it just speaks to the strength of that Bond compilation, that even with multiple weaker tracks, it didn't trip it up. Because those peak moments, Bassey, McCartney, Simon, they were just deemed completely untouchable.
It's a group that was just defined by extreme contrast.
Absolutely. The best was historically exceptional, and the worst was contextually brilliant, but structurally flawed as a standalone product. The results show a clear, cold preference for robust professional music over deeply personal but technically average efforts.
So to synthesize what we've learned from this piece of the album quest, the whole process is this necessary and often painful exercise in critical comparison.
Yeah, it really is.
It forces the author, and by extension it forces us, to weigh these wildly different genres, film anthems, synth pop, a TV soundtrack, all on a single universal scale of quality.
And it proves that sometimes the music we cherish the most, the album tied to our deepest memories, isn't necessarily the music we can honestly call the best when we apply a truly critical lens.
Exactly.
We watched James Bond, representing this untouchable history, slay the singing vampire slayer. And in doing that, he really showed the limitations of nostalgia itself. He did. It forces us to separate critical thinking from emotional attachment, even when that attachment is decades long and really formative.